The year was 1941. The world was at war. The shadow of Nazi Germany loomed large, stretching its evil tendrils across Europe. In the small Polish town of Buczacz, 10-year-old Maxwell Smart lived an ordinary life. He played with his friends. He went to school. He loved his family. He was oblivious to the storm that was about to engulf his world. Maxwell's family was Jewish. They were part of a vibrant community that had thrived in Buczacz for generations. Life wasn't always easy, but they had each other. They had their traditions. They had their faith. But the rise of Nazi Germany was about to shatter their peaceful existence. The world was changing, and soon, Maxwell's life would change too, forever. Whispers of war turned into a deafening roar as Nazi troops marched into Poland. Fear and uncertainty gripped the Jewish community. Stories of the Nazis' brutality began to circulate. The once familiar streets of Buczacz became filled with fear. Maxwell's childhood, filled with innocence and joy, was about to be stolen. He was about to enter a world of unimaginable darkness. The Nazi occupation transformed Buczacz. Maxwell's world, once safe and familiar, was now dangerous and hostile. The Nazis wasted no time in targeting the Jews. They imposed harsh restrictions. They confiscated businesses. They instilled terror into the hearts of innocent people. Maxwell witnessed his town, his home, being strangled by the grip of hatred. The vibrant Jewish community, once full of life, was herded into a cramped ghetto. Families were torn apart, their lives upended. The streets of the ghetto were filled with despair. Hunger became a constant companion. Fear permeated every aspect of their existence. Maxwell's childhood was gone, replaced by a struggle for survival. Maxwell watched as his parents, once strong and reassuring, were stripped of their dignity. Their faces, once etched with laughter lines, now bore the weight of unimaginable worry. The Nazis, with their venomous ideology, sought to erase the Jews. Maxwell's family, along with millions of others, became victims of a genocide that would forever scar the world. In the face of this unimaginable darkness, Maxwell's innocence began to crumble. He was forced to confront the horrors of a world consumed by hatred. He witnessed the depths of human cruelty. He saw the evil that men could inflict upon one another. His childhood was over. He was now a witness to the darkest chapter in human history. Maxwell found himself alone, a child adrift in a sea of towering trees. The whispers of the wind through the leaves replaced the familiar sounds of his childhood. He clutched the small bundle of belongings Jasko had given him, a blanket, a few pieces of bread, and a flint and steel. He was on his own, a tiny speck of humanity swallowed by the vastness of the forest. Fear gnawed at his insides. Every rustle of leaves, every snap of a twig sent shivers down his spine. He was surrounded by danger, hunted by those who sought to exterminate him and his people. But amid the fear, a glimmer of determination flickered within him. His mother's last words echoed in his ears. "Save yourself." He clung to those words like a lifeline. He remembered Jasko's instructions, his gruff voice softened by kindness. How to build a makeshift shelter, how to identify edible plants, how to make himself invisible within the forest. Survival became his only goal, his every thought consumed with staying one step ahead of the hunters. The forest, once a place of wonder and beauty, was now his battleground, a silent testament to his will to live. The forest was a world unto itself, a tapestry of greens and browns, of shadows and sunlight. The air hung heavy with the scent of pine needles and damp earth. Maxwell learned to navigate this new world, his senses sharpening with each passing day. He moved silently, a ghost among the trees. He built himself a shelter, a crude structure of branches and leaves, hidden deep within the undergrowth. It wasn't much, but it offered a semblance of protection from the elements, and more importantly, from prying eyes. He spent his days foraging for food, his stomach a constant reminder of his precarious existence. Berries, mushrooms, the occasional bird's egg. He ate what he could find, savoring every bite. Nightfall brought a different kind of fear. The darkness seemed to amplify every sound, turning the forest into a symphony of unknown terrors. He would lie awake, his heart pounding in his chest, listening for the telltale sounds of approaching danger. The rustling of leaves, the snapping of twigs. Were they just the sounds of the forest, or were they the footsteps of his pursuers? Hunger became his constant companion, a gnawing emptiness that never truly abated. The meager rations Jasko had given him dwindled with each passing day. He learned to identify edible plants, their leaves and roots offering a meager sustenance. He trapped small animals, his heart heavy with a mixture of guilt and gratitude as he took their lives to sustain his own. He would often go days without a proper meal, his body growing thin and weak. He would dream of food, of warm bread and steaming bowls of soup, of the feast his mother used to prepare for the Sabbath. But the dreams only served to intensify his hunger, a cruel reminder of all that he had lost. Yet, even in the darkest of times, a flicker of hope remained. The rustling of leaves, the chirping of birds, the warmth of the sun on his skin, these small reminders of the beauty that still existed in the world gave him the strength to keep going. He would close his eyes and imagine a future where the war was over, where he was reunited with his family, where he could once again live a life free from fear. One night, as he huddled in his shelter, shivering against the cold, he made a promise to himself. He would survive. He would honor the memory of his family by living to see the day when the darkness lifted. He would never forget the horrors he had witnessed, but he would not let hatred consume him. He closed his eyes and whispered a prayer, his voice barely audible above the rustling of the leaves. He prayed for his family, for their safety and well-being. He prayed for the strength to endure, for the courage to face each new day. And he prayed for an end to the war, for a world where such atrocities would never again be allowed to happen. The forest, once a symbol of fear and isolation, became his sanctuary, a place where he could confront his demons and find solace in the silence. He was alone, yet he was surrounded by the resilience of nature, the enduring cycle of life and death, of growth and decay. And in that cycle, he found a glimmer of hope, a belief that even in the darkest of times, life in some form would find a way. Maxwell's existence depended entirely on the kindness of Jasko Rudnicki. The poor farmer, who lived in a humble mud hut with his wife and sons, risked everything to shelter a Jewish boy. Maxwell often saw the worry etched on Jasko's face, the heavy burden of responsibility he carried. Yet Jasko never wavered in his compassion. He would bring Maxwell scraps of food whenever he could, risking his own family's well-being for a stranger's child. One day, the news spread through the forest like wildfire. The Nazis were conducting searches, their presence casting a long, dark shadow over Maxwell's fragile sanctuary. Jasko arrived at the edge of the woods, his face pale, his voice low and urgent. "They know," he whispered. "They know about you." Fear pulsed through Maxwell, cold and relentless. He knew what this meant for Jasko, for his family, for their own survival. But Jasko, despite the imminent danger, remained resolute. He looked at Maxwell, his eyes filled with a fierce determination. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't let them take you." And Maxwell, despite the fear gnawing at his insides, believed him. For in Jasko's eyes, he saw the unwavering strength of a man who refused to bow to tyranny, a man who clung to his humanity in the face of unimaginable evil. As the sun began to set, casting long, menacing shadows across the clearing. The Nazis arrived at Jasko's hut. Maxwell, hidden safely in the woods, watched his heart pounding in his chest. He saw them question Jasko, their faces twisted with suspicion, hands resting on their holstered pistols. Kazia, Jasko's wife, stood on the porch, her face pale, arms wrapped protectively around her two young sons. Jasko's voice was firm and unwavering as he denied any knowledge of a hidden Jewish boy. The Nazis searched the hut, their boots stomping across the wooden floor, eyes missing nothing. They found nothing. Jasko had anticipated their arrival, had hidden Maxwell's meager belongings, had erased any trace of his existence. As the Nazis departed, their frustration evident in their curt nods and narrowed eyes, a wave of relief washed over Maxwell. He wanted to rush out, to thank Jasko, to embrace him in gratitude. But he knew he couldn't. He was a hunted animal, his very existence a threat to those who dared to help him. So he stayed hidden, watching as Jasko and his family slowly retreated into their home, the door closing behind them like a final punctuation mark on a moment of extraordinary courage and compassion. That night, under the cover of darkness, Jasko came to Maxwell's makeshift shelter. He brought with him a small loaf of bread and a hunk of cheese, food that was more precious than gold in those desperate times. But more importantly, he brought with him a heavy heart and a difficult truth. "It's too dangerous now," he whispered. "They'll be back, and next time..." He didn't need to finish the sentence. Maxwell understood. Jasko's face was etched with a pain that ran deeper than fear. He had made a promise to protect Maxwell, but the weight of that promise had become too great, the risk to his own family too immense. Maxwell saw the tears glistening in Jasko's eyes, tears shed not for himself, but for the boy he could no longer protect. "You have to go," Jasko said, his voice thick with emotion. "Go deeper into the woods, stay hidden, and never..." He stopped, unable to voice the finality of his words. Maxwell, his own heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and fear, nodded silently. He understood the impossible choice Jasko had to make, the sacrifice he was being forced to endure. And in that moment, Maxwell vowed to honor that sacrifice by surviving, by living to see the day when such impossible choices would no longer need to be made. Before he left, Jasko taught Maxwell the ways of the forest. He showed him how to identify edible plants, how to build traps for small animals, how to make himself invisible amongst the trees. He passed on his knowledge, his skills, his will to survive, to the young boy who had become like a son to him. As dawn approached, casting a pale light through the trees, they said their goodbyes. It was a farewell filled with unspoken words, with the weight of shared danger and the silent understanding that their paths might never cross again. Jasko embraced Maxwell, a long, silent hug that conveyed more than words ever could. Then, with a final squeeze of his hand, Jasko turned and disappeared into the trees. Maxwell watched him go, his heart heavy with a mixture of gratitude and fear, of loss and determination. He was alone again, adrift in a sea of green and brown, his survival dependent on his own wits and the lessons he had learned from the man who had risked everything to save him. Their bond, forged in the fires of fear and uncertainty, would stay with Maxwell long after the echoes of Jasko's footsteps had faded into the silence of the forest. The ghetto walls, hastily erected from wood and barbed wire, were more than physical barriers. They were symbols of confinement, of separation, of the systematic stripping away of freedom and dignity. Inside the ghetto, the world shrunk to a cramped and crowded existence. Families huddled together in cramped quarters, sharing meager rations and dwindling hope. Maxwell, his young mind struggling to comprehend the injustice of it all, clung to the memories of his former life, memories that now seemed as distant as the stars in the night sky. The days blurred into an endless cycle of hunger, fear, and uncertainty. The Nazis, with their cruel efficiency, tightened their grip on the ghetto, their presence a constant reminder of the ever-present danger. Maxwell witnessed horrors that no child should ever have to see. He saw the elderly collapse from exhaustion, their bodies ravaged by hunger. He saw the sick left to die, their pleas for help met with indifference. He saw the despair in the eyes of his fellow prisoners, a despair that threatened to extinguish the last embers of hope. Yet even in the depths of that living nightmare, the human spirit found ways to endure. Maxwell witnessed acts of kindness that shone like beacons of light in the darkness. He saw strangers sharing their meager rations with those in greater need. He heard whispered prayers, offering solace and a glimmer of hope. He saw the unbreakable bonds of family and community, offering strength and support in the face of unimaginable adversity. The echoes of loss reverberated through the ghetto, each day bringing news of another family torn apart, another life extinguished. Maxwell lived in a perpetual state of anxiety, his young mind tormented by the fear of losing those few precious souls who remained. He clung to his mother and sister, their presence a source of comfort in a world that had become cold and heartless. One day, a rumor swept through the ghetto, a whisper of hope in the midst of despair. The Nazis, it was said, were rounding up able-bodied men for work details outside the ghetto. It was a dangerous proposition, fraught with uncertainty, but for some, it offered a glimmer of hope, a chance to escape the suffocating confines of their prison. Maxwell's father, desperate to provide for his family, made the agonizing decision to volunteer. He promised his family he would return, his voice trembling with a mixture of hope and fear. Maxwell, his young heart heavy with a premonition of loss, watched as his father disappeared into the throng of men being herded out of the ghetto gates. He never saw his father again. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and still there was no word of his fate. Hope slowly gave way to a numbing despair, the pain of his absence a constant ache in Maxwell's heart. The ghetto, once a place of confinement, was about to become a place of unimaginable loss. The Nazis, their true intentions masked by deception, announced that the ghetto was being liquidated, its inhabitants to be resettled elsewhere. Maxwell's mother, her intuition sharpened by fear, sensed the danger lurking beneath the Nazis' lies. She knew, with a mother's instinct, that they were being sent to their deaths. In the dead of night, as the ghetto slept, she woke Maxwell and his sister. Her voice, usually soft and soothing, was now a strained whisper, tinged with urgency and fear. "You have to run!" she hissed, her eyes filled with a desperate determination. "Run and don't look back." Maxwell, confused and terrified, clung to his mother, his young mind unable to comprehend the finality of her words. But his mother, her love for her children eclipsing even her own fear, pushed him away, her hands trembling as they brushed against his cheeks. "Save yourselves," she whispered, her voice breaking with emotion. "Live for me, for all of us." And then with a final, heart-wrenching embrace, she pushed him and his sister into the darkness, her love the only shield she could offer against the horrors that awaited them. Section 4. The Weight of Freedom. Maxwell and his sister, their small hands clasped tightly together, ran through the labyrinthine streets of the ghetto, the echoes of their footsteps mingling with the sounds of chaos and despair. They dodged patrols, their young bodies moving with a desperate urgency, their minds struggling to comprehend the enormity of what was happening. They emerged from the ghetto into the darkness beyond, the weight of their newfound freedom heavy on their young shoulders. The night swallowed them whole, concealing them in its embrace. They were free, but their freedom was a double-edged sword, a burden of responsibility mixed with the constant fear of capture. Maxwell, his 10-year-old heart pounding in his chest, clung to his sister's hand, their shared terror the only solace they had left. The world outside the ghetto was a vast and unforgiving place, filled with dangers both real and imagined. But it was also a world where hope, however faint, still flickered. And as Maxwell ran, his breath catching in his throat, he swore to himself that he would survive. He would honor his mother's sacrifice, her last desperate act of love, by clinging to life with every fiber of his being. He would run towards the light, even if it meant outrunning the shadows of his past. Section 1. A New World, a Heavy Heart, Canada. The word itself held the promise of a new beginning, a sanctuary from the horrors of war-torn Europe. For Maxwell, a teenager now, stepping onto Canadian soil was like stepping onto another planet. Gone were the bombed-out buildings, the barbed wire fences, the constant fear that clung to him like a shroud. Here the air was clean, the streets were safe, and the people, though strangers, seemed to possess an inherent kindness that he had almost forgotten existed. Yet, amidst the relief and the wonder of this new world, Maxwell carried a heavy heart. The memories of his past, of his family torn from him, of the horrors he had witnessed, were etched deep within his soul. They were scars that time could not erase, wounds that refused to heal. He was surrounded by people, yet he felt utterly alone, an outsider in a land that promised so much, yet could never truly understand the depths of his pain. He had come to Canada as part of the War Orphans Project, a beacon of hope for Jewish children who had lost everything in the war. He was grateful for the opportunity, for the chance to build a new life, but gratitude was a double-edged sword. It came intertwined with guilt, with the knowledge that he had survived while so many others, including his own family, had perished. Section 2. Echoes of the Past. Adjusting to life in Canada was a constant struggle. The language, the customs, the sheer pace of life, everything felt strange and unfamiliar. Maxwell, haunted by memories he could not escape, found himself caught between two worlds, belonging to neither. He yearned for the warmth of his family, the comfort of their presence, the echo of their laughter. But those echoes were fading, replaced by a silence that was deafening in its finality. He tried to focus on the present, on learning English, on finding his place in this new land. He took on odd jobs, his hands, once so accustomed to the feel of a paintbrush, now calloused from manual labor. He worked long hours, seeking solace in physical exhaustion, trying to outrun the memories that chased him relentlessly. But the past had a way of creeping in, of infiltrating his dreams, of manifesting in the faces of strangers. He would see his mother's eyes in the worried frown of an elderly woman, hear his father's laughter in the playful banter of children in the park. He carried his memories like a hidden burden, a weight that threatened to crush him. Despite the pain, the loneliness, the constant struggle to reconcile his past with his present, Maxwell refused to give up. He had survived the horrors of the Holocaust, had endured unimaginable loss, and he would not let the echoes of that darkness define his future. He had a choice: to succumb to the weight of his memories or to honor them by building a life worthy of their sacrifice. He threw himself into his work, his determination fueled by a mixture of grief and hope. He learned new skills, embraced new opportunities, and slowly, painstakingly, began to build a life for himself in this new land. He met other survivors, their shared experiences forming an unspoken bond of understanding, a testament to the resilience of the human spirit. He found love, a beacon of light in the darkness that had enveloped him for so long. He married, started a family, and in the laughter of his children, He found a reason to hope, a reason to believe that the future held the promise of healing and redemption. Yet, even as he built a new life, brick by brick, a part of Maxwell remained trapped in the past. The Holocaust, with its unspeakable horrors, had cast a long shadow over his life, a silence he felt unable to break. He kept his memories locked away, hidden from the world, even from those he loved most. He feared that sharing his story, reliving the pain, would shatter the fragile peace he had found. So he remained silent, his past a hidden wound, a source of unspoken pain that festered beneath the surface. He poured his emotions into his work, his paintings becoming a canvas for his unspoken grief, his abstract forms and vibrant colors hinting at the turmoil that raged within. He had survived the Holocaust, but a part of him remained trapped in its grip, a prisoner of his own silence. He had found a safe haven, a place to call home, but the journey towards true healing, towards confronting the ghosts of his past, was far from over. Years passed. Maxwell's children grew. His business thrived. He had built a life for himself, a testament to his resilience and unwavering spirit. Yet the art he had loved as a boy, the art that had sustained him in the darkest of times, lay dormant, a hidden passion waiting to be rekindled. One evening, his son, Anthony, brought home a set of paints and brushes as a gift. "For you, Dad," he said, a knowing smile on his face. Maxwell looked at the art supplies, a wave of emotion washing over him. It was as if a long-forgotten part of himself had been awakened, a part he had buried deep within, fearing the memories it might unleash. He hesitated, his fingers tracing the smooth surface of a blank canvas. The silence of the room seemed to press in on him, filled with the ghosts of his past. But then, with a deep breath, he dipped his brush into a pool of crimson, and as the color flowed onto the canvas, so too did the memories. He painted feverishly, his brushstrokes a flurry of motion, his canvas a reflection of the turmoil that raged within. He painted the forests of his childhood, the towering trees that had sheltered him, the dappled sunlight filtering through the leaves. He painted the faces of those he had loved and lost, their eyes staring back at him with a mixture of sadness and hope. He didn't try to make sense of the images that flowed from his brush, didn't try to censor the raw emotions that poured onto the canvas. He painted the darkness and the light, the pain and the resilience, the horrors he had witnessed and the beauty that still existed in the world. He painted until his hand ached, until the memories, once so vivid and painful, began to fade into the background, replaced by the sheer joy of creation. In the act of painting, Maxwell found a release, a way to confront his demons and to transform his pain into something tangible, something beautiful. Word of Maxwell's art spread. People were drawn to the raw emotion, the vibrant energy, the haunting beauty of his work. He had no formal training, no connections in the art world, but his paintings spoke for themselves. Each brushstroke a testament to the power of the human spirit to endure even the most unimaginable horrors. Soon, he was exhibiting his work in galleries, his name appearing in art magazines. Success, once a distant dream, became a reality. He was praised for his talent, his vision, his ability to convey such profound emotion through his art. But success, Maxwell discovered, was a double-edged sword. As his fame grew, so too did the pressure to explain his inspiration, to reveal the source of the raw emotion that resonated so deeply with viewers. He was asked about his childhood, his family, his past. And each time, he would deflect, evade, retreat back into the silence he had built around himself. Section 4. A legacy forged in pain. Decades had passed since the end of the war, but for Maxwell, the memories were as vivid as ever. The faces of his loved ones, the horrors he had witnessed, the guilt of survival, these were burdens he carried with him every day. He had found a measure of peace in his art, in his family, in the life he had built for himself. But the past was always there, lurking just beneath the surface. He knew that his story, like the stories of so many other survivors, needed to be told. It was a story of unimaginable loss, but also a story of resilience, of courage, of the enduring power of the human spirit. But how could he break the silence? How could he revisit the darkness, knowing that it might consume him? He thought of his children, of his grandchildren, of the world they were inheriting. He realized that his story, painful as it was not just his own. It was a story that needed to be shared, a warning from the past, a reminder that hatred and intolerance could never be allowed to flourish again. Section 1. The Power of Testimony. The decision to break his silence did not come easily. It was a decision fraught with pain, a reopening of old wounds, a revisiting of a darkness he had tried so hard to outrun. But Maxwell understood, with a clarity born of both experience and age, that silence was no longer an option. He had a responsibility, not just to himself, but to the memory of those who had been silenced, to the generations who would inherit the legacy of the Holocaust. When he finally began to speak, his voice, though trembling at first, grew stronger with each word. He spoke of his childhood, of the vibrant Jewish community that had thrived in Buczacz, of the fear that had gripped them as the Nazi shadow descended upon their world. He spoke of his time in hiding, of the kindness of strangers, of the constant struggle for survival. He spoke of his family, his voice cracking with emotion as he recalled their faces, their voices, the love that had bound them together. He spoke of their fate, of the emptiness that had filled his life in the wake of their absence. And as he spoke, he felt a weight lifting from his shoulders, a sense of release that came from finally sharing his burden with the world. Section 2. Reign as Refuge. There were moments during his years in hiding when the world seemed to shrink to the confines of his makeshift shelter. The forest, once a place of wonder and beauty, had become a prison of fear and uncertainty. Hunger gnawed at his stomach, cold seeped into his bones, and the loneliness was almost unbearable. But there was one thing that brought him solace, a reminder that even in the darkest of times, nature offered a glimmer of hope. Rain. When the heavens opened and the rain poured down, washing away the scent of fear and the dust of the forest floor, Maxwell felt a sense of peace wash over him. The rhythmic drumming of raindrops on the leaves above his shelter was like a lullaby, a soothing balm for his weary soul. He knew that the rain would make it difficult for his pursuers to track him, that the mud and the mist would provide a temporary shield from their watchful eyes. But it was more than just a matter of physical safety. The rain, in its cleansing embrace, seemed to wash away his fear, to offer a moment of respite from the constant struggle for survival. Section 3. A Legacy of Hope. Maxwell's story, like the stories of so many Holocaust survivors, is a testament to the resilience of the human spirit, a poignant reminder of the power of hope to flourish even in the darkest of times. It is a story that needs to be told, not just to honor the memory of those who perished, but to inspire future generations to fight against hatred and intolerance in all its forms. By sharing his story, Maxwell embraced his past, not as a source of shame or guilt, but as a catalyst for healing and understanding. He transformed his pain into a legacy of hope, his voice a beacon of light illuminating the darkness of one of history's darkest chapters. His decision to participate in the documentary, To bare his soul to the world was a testament to his courage and his unwavering belief in the power of truth. He knew that his story, though painful to relive, had the power to educate, to inspire, to ensure that the horrors of the Holocaust would never be forgotten. And in sharing his story, Maxwell found a measure of peace, a sense of completion, knowing that he had honored the memory of his loved ones by transforming his pain into a legacy of hope for future generations.